The doppelganger at the workplace. In 2012, a group of new employees working for an insurance company in Philippines experienced something none of them could explain. They were only a month or two into the job and were still getting used to the routine of night shifts. During one of their breaks, something strange happened. A few of them decided to step outside to smoke, and one of their coworkers, Nino, stayed behind to finish up some work and said he'd catch up with them later. Although not all of them smoked, they all went down together, using the break as a chance to unwind. As they stood outside talking about an upcoming movie, they suddenly saw Nino walk past them. It caught them off guard since he had finished his work much quicker than expected. He was walking quickly by now, almost like he was in a rush. They called out to him a few times, expecting him to stop and join them, but he didn't. That was unusual since Nino was known to be outgoing and friendly. Instead, without slowing down, he turned his head and said, "I'm heading to 7-Eleven. I'm hungry. You guys go ahead and wait for me upstairs." His voice sounded normal, but his face looked off, like something was bothering him. The 7-Eleven he mentioned was about a block from the office. They didn't think much of it at the time and figured he just wanted to grab something to eat on his own. Once they finished their break, they went back inside and took the elevator up to their floor. When the elevator doors opened, they all froze. Nino was standing right there. He hadn't gone anywhere. He said he had just wrapped up his work and was about to head out for his break. At first, they joked that maybe he had some way of teleporting, but the expression on his face made it clear he wasn't joking. He hadn't gone outside yet, and he hadn't spoken to anyone about going to 7-Eleven. When they told him what they'd seen, that he had passed them outside, spoken to them, and looked exactly like himself, he was just as shocked as they were. The detail that made it even stranger was that the version of Nino they saw downstairs had been wearing the exact same clothes. Other coworkers later said they had experienced similar things, and some even claimed that seeing a doppelganger like that was something that welcomed new employees to the company. After hearing the story, Nino decided not to go downstairs after all. Whatever appetite he had was now gone. Most of the group left the company within a year or two, but they still talk about that night whenever they meet up. It's one of those memories that never really fades. The event reminded one of them of a similar experience from college, also involving a doppelganger, which hadn't yet been published at the time. This was just one of many strange experiences, but it was one that stayed with all of them. The father at the door. One Sunday morning, two brothers were watching Cardcaptor Sakura in their small apartment. It was a 2-bedroom unit with a kitchen and a bathroom near the front door. A large window faced the entrance, making it easy to see who was outside. The building was quiet. The second floor hadn't been rented out yet, so they were the only ones living there. As the show played on, someone knocked. One of the brothers looked out the window and saw who he thought was their father standing outside. Thinking nothing of it, he walked over and was just about to unlock the door when their mother rushed over and pulled him back. She shouted not to open it. Confused, he told her he had just seen their dad. Her expression changed immediately. She ran to the window, then to the peephole. The more she looked, the more her panic grew. Without giving much of an explanation, she told both boys to go to the farthest room in the apartment and stay there. Then she went to wake their father, who had been asleep. He got up, irritated and confused, until they explained what had happened, that a man who looked exactly like him was standing silently outside, knocking at the door. While they spoke, the knocking continued. Their father yelled through the door, asking who it was. There was still no answer. He warned that he was going to call the police, but the man still didn't respond. He just stood there, completely still, right in front of the door. That was when their mother decided to gather the kids and take them to the room farthest from the entrance. She didn't wait for more answers, she just wanted them away from whatever was on the other side of that door. Meanwhile, their father grabbed a metal bat and got ready to open it himself. But when he finally swung the door open, there was nothing. The hallway was empty. Their father searched the area, but there was no sign of anyone. What made it even stranger was that no sound had been heard the entire time, not from the front door opening or closing, not from footsteps outside. The apartment door was heavy and made noise whenever it moved, but that morning it had been completely still. All three of them, the brother, the mother, and the one who went to the door, had seen the same man, and they all agreed that he looked just like their father. Emilie, Sagee, and the strange case of the doppelganger. In the mid-1800s, a strange case emerged from a boarding school in what is now Latvia. The story revolves around a teacher named Emilie Sagee, whose life and career were disrupted repeatedly by something she couldn't see, but others could. According to multiple witnesses, Emilie had a double, but what many described as a ghostly twin that would silently appear beside her and mimic her actions. The most well-documented version of the events comes from a book written in 1860 by Robert Dale Owen, who was a social reformer and spiritualist. He himself learned about Emilie's case through first-hand testimony from a student at Pension Von Neuvel, a prestigious girls' school in 1845. Emilie had been working there as a teacher that year, and it became the setting for what many consider one of the clearest historical records of a doppelganger. At the time, Emilie was only 32 years old. She was described as smart, soft-spoken, and well-liked by both students and staff. But despite her qualifications and demeanor, she had an unusual employment history. Before arriving at the school, she had already worked at 18 different schools over the span of 16 years. The reason for this frequent job turnover became clear shortly after her arrival. Her problems began when other people, including students and teachers, started seeing what looked like a second Emilie. The first recorded incident happened while she was teaching a group of 17 girls. She was writing on the chalkboard with her back turned to the class when another version of her appeared beside her and began copying her movements. All of the students reportedly saw it. Emilie, however, remained unaware. In fact, throughout all the reported incidents, she never once saw her double. After that, the appearances became more and more frequent. Some students reported that they saw the second Emilie sitting quietly beside the real one during meals. Others saw her silently mirroring Emilie's movements during lessons or walking alongside her in the halls. In one instance, Emilie was helping a student get ready for an event when the double appeared next to her and began fixing the same dress. The student, overwhelmed and terrified, fainted on the spot. The most widely reported incident, though, involved a group of 42 students in a sewing class. Emilie had given them assignments and then stepped out to the garden, where she was visible through the classroom windows. Moments later, though, the classroom door opened and the second Emilie entered and sat down in the teacher's chair. The girls, initially thinking nothing of it, began to notice that the real Emilie was still outside in the garden, tending to flowers. Some students panicked and ran. A few, though, were brave enough to approach the second Emilie and try to touch her. They later described the sensation as touching thick air or cobwebs, being that their hands passed through her body as if she was made of vapor. The figure eventually vanished after that, just before the real Emilie came back into the building. Despite the mounting reports, Emilie herself never witnessed her double and had no control over its actions. She could only rely on what others told her, and interestingly, people noted that whenever her twin appeared, Emilie often looked exhausted, weak, or distracted, as if some part of her energy had been pulled away. As sightings continued, parents of the students grew concerned. Some began withdrawing their daughters from the school, and faced with growing pressure, the headmaster, Mr. Butch, who had previously defended Emilie and dismissed the sightings as mass hysteria, eventually let her go. It was said that he did so with great reluctance, acknowledging that Emilie was one of the most competent and dedicated teachers he had ever employed. After leaving the school, Emilie vanished from public record. No one knows what became of her or whether the strange phenomenon followed her elsewhere. Percy Bysshe Shelley's doppelganger. In the final moments of his life, Percy Bysshe Shelley was haunted by visions and premonitions that disturbed those closest to him. Most notably, he claimed to have seen his own doppelganger, which was considered a ghostly version of himself that seemed to appear during moments of emotional turmoil. The most well-known account came from 1812. Shelley reportedly told others that this spectral twin would occasionally appear to him, asking questions like, "How long do you expect to be content?" Some friends even claimed to have seen this figure when Shelley wasn't around, and these sightings stopped entirely after his death. For many, this was more than just a coincidence, but it felt like a warning. During the summer of 1822, Shelley was staying in Italy. The household was emotionally strained though. Mary Shelley was recovering from the loss of multiple children, and Claire Claremont had just learned of her daughter's death, while Shelley himself was in a fragile state, plagued by visions and night terrors. In one instance, he claimed to see a naked child rise from the sea, smiling with hands clasped in joy, and shortly after, Mary suffered a life-threatening miscarriage. The stress seemed to unravel him, and things escalated even further. One night, Shelley ran screaming into Mary's room, claiming to have seen a man standing over her with hands wrapped around her neck. That man, he said, had his own face. A few days before that, he had already seen the same double in broad daylight, walking toward him on the terrace. It asked him the same question: "How much longer do you mean to be content?" By early July, he seemed unable to shake the idea that something terrible was coming. Despite warnings of an approaching storm, Shelley insisted on setting sail aboard his boat, the Don Juan. When another sailor warned them to take in their sails or risk capsizing, Shelley refused. He even grabbed his friend's arm to stop him from obeying. Hours later, the storm took their lives. 10 days passed before his body ended up being recovered. His face and hands had been destroyed by the sea, and he was only identified by his clothing and a copy of Keats's poem found in his pocket. The strange pajama switch. About 15 years ago, a parent was putting their 2 toddlers to bed when something strange happened, something that they still talk about to this day. That night, the son had been especially insistent on wearing his favorite red race car pajamas. Once he was changed and tucked into bed, everything seemed normal. The parent left the room and went to the kitchen, where a friend had stopped by to hang out and catch up. The kitchen table had a clear view of the children's bedroom doorway, and as the 2 adults sat talking, the evening was calm and uneventful. It was until they were suddenly interrupted by the sound of the son screaming that everything changed. They both looked toward the bedroom and were shocked to see him standing there crying loudly. But something was off. Instead of the red race car pajamas he had been wearing just moments ago, he now had on a green pair covered in airplanes. The sight made both adults freeze. They knew the boy wasn't able to dress himself yet, and there was no way he could have changed his clothes on his own. For a brief moment, they stared in silence, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Then, without a second, the boy vanished from the doorway. They rushed to the bedroom and found him still tucked into bed, fast asleep in the red race car pajamas, just as he had been earlier. He hadn't moved, and there was no sign that he had ever gotten up. The friend asked if the parent had seen the same thing. They had. Both of them had witnessed it, and neither had an explanation. Shortly afterwards, the friend left, and the parent, worried something might happen, stayed in the bedroom that night and slept on the floor beside the children. The event was never explained after that, and the boy doesn't remember any of it. But regardless, the memory stuck with the adults who witnessed it, and even now, years later, they still bring it up. A moment where reality briefly bent in a way neither of them could forget. Guy de Maupassant's doppelganger. In the final years of his life, Guy de Maupassant became increasingly convinced he was being shadowed by something he couldn't explain, something that looked just like him. He spoke of seeing his double often, not in dreams but fully awake. It would appear in his home, sitting in his armchair, or walking through a door that had never opened. Once, while writing at his desk, he claimed his double walked in, sat down across from him, and began dictating a story. That story would become La Horla. The account wasn't just literary embellishment though. Maupassant mentioned these incidents to his close friend Paul Bourget, explaining that he often opened his door to find himself already inside. He would see his doppelganger sitting calmly, sometimes reading, sometimes staring back at him. He said he knew it had to be a hallucination, but that didn't make it any less disturbing. What disturbed him even more though than the vision itself was his awareness of how real it felt. Those around him noticed the changes too. His behavior grew erratic, and he would stop mid-sentence during conversations, saying he heard voices rising up from the floor. His reflections seemed unfamiliar too, and he often described twilight as something oppressive, like a curtain being pulled over Paris. Maupassant's mistress also wrote in her diary that he was becoming harder to recognize, not just in temperament but in presence. His once confident tone became full of dread, laced with strange metaphors about shadows, voices, and the end of joy. As his mental state declined, so did his control over reality. Not long after the publication of Le Horla, he suffered what seemed like a full break. He believed war had been declared between France and Germany and insisted his valet keep his military papers ready. He also began referring to himself in the third person. He tried to end his life twice in 1 week. Eventually, Maupassant was taken to a private asylum where he would live out the last year and a half of his life. There, he grew violent and paranoid. He accused his servant of taking his place in the world, not just socially but cosmically, as if the double he had been seeing was no longer content to exist beside him. He then died in 1893 at the age of 42. By then, his mind was gone, but his work, especially La Horla, remained as a haunting record of a man who may have been warning the world not just about madness, but about the way of seeing oneself from the outside. Doppelganger or time gap. During a summer visit to a quiet village in Greece, a woman went to stay with her boyfriend who was working at a beach bar for the season. They were living together at his cousin's traditional house tucked away in the woods, which was a remote, older building with a footpath leading down from the main road to the front door. Because the property was so secluded, they were always alert to anyone approaching. Whenever they heard footsteps coming down the path, they would glance at the window to check who it was. Over time, they realized that while lying in bed, they could see the path perfectly through the window's reflection. They started keeping the window cracked open at a specific angle so they could use that reflection as a makeshift mirror to see whether it was a stranger, his cousin, or someone else passing by. Most mornings followed a routine though. He would leave early to head to the beach bar about a 20-minute drive away, and they would usually have breakfast together once she arrived later. But on this particular day, things felt a little different. They had a minor argument the night before, and she decided to stay home instead of joining him. Although she was awake when his alarm went off, she kept her eyes closed, listening to him get ready. She was still stewing a bit from the night before, half expecting him to say something before leaving. Curious, she peeked with one eye and saw him wearing swim trunks and a bright yellow t-shirt, a combination she couldn't help but internally mock. She thought, why does he look like a cartoon bird? But held back a laugh, still a little irritated. He told her he was leaving, said goodbye, and she responded with a distant bye. From the bed, she watched his reflection walk up the path and drive off. Once he was gone, she picked up her phone and began texting a friend about the argument, venting about how the morning had gone. She emphasized this later. She was awake, texting, alert, and emotionally keyed up. There was no chance she had fallen back asleep. Roughly 30 minutes later, she heard footsteps again. She looked toward the window's reflection and saw him walking back. Same yellow shirt, same swim trunks, this time carrying a plastic bag, the contents wrapped in foil. Assuming he had brought her breakfast, she jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, suddenly softened by the gesture. But when she opened the door, no one was there. Not even the cats that usually waited by the entrance. A small family of them lived in the garden and always ran to greet him when he came home, knowing they'd be fed and petted. Their absence struck her as odd. She then stepped outside, walked around the property barefoot, and looked for him near the back of the house, thinking maybe he had gone to feed the cats. Still nothing. She then climbed the narrow path leading to the road, thinking maybe he was at his car, but it wasn't there either. Still confused, she ran upstairs to look out from the second floor, hoping maybe someone else wearing the same clothes had passed by. But the woods were silent. No one was there. She called him and asked where he was, and he said he was at work. She briefly explained what she had seen, though she forgot to mention the bag of food. He handed the phone to his cousin thereafter, who confirmed he hadn't returned home. She sent more messages to her friend too, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Later that day, she dozed off and slept until 8 p.m. There was a knock at the door and she opened it, and this time everything was exactly as it had been hours earlier. The cats rushed in and then her boyfriend appeared, standing in the doorway in the same yellow shirt and swim trunks, holding a plastic bag with food wrapped in foil. It was as if time had simply resumed from where it had paused. She didn't know what to make of it. The memory was vivid, detailed, and linear, not something that could be chalked up to a half-dream or a trick of the mind. She had been walking around, texting, calling, fully aware of everything. What made it more strange was that this wasn't the first time something like this happened in his presence. Years earlier, while he was still married, he and his then wife had fallen asleep on the couch during the summer. She woke up and saw him standing in the kitchen, silent and expressionless. When she asked him to bring her some water, he didn't respond, just stared at her. Then she realized he was still lying next to her, asleep. She panicked and woke him up, and when he looked toward the kitchen, he saw the same figure, himself, before it vanished. Cousin's doppelganger. When he was around 9 or 10 years old, the writer and his family went to visit relatives for Thanksgiving. They lived about 2 hours away and had hosted the family many times before. He had never experienced anything strange at their house, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary that weekend. Because there were so many people staying over, he and his cousin, who was 2 years older, ended up sharing a spare bedroom in the basement that had a couple of beds. That night, they went to bed as usual. At some point during the night, he woke up for no clear reason. Sitting up in bed, he glanced around the room and noticed a faint green light coming from under the closet door. It hadn't been there earlier when they were falling asleep, but he didn't think much of it. He then turned over and tried to go back to sleep. A few minutes later, he suddenly had the sense that someone was nearby, like someone was standing over him or watching him closely. He then rolled onto his back and opened his eyes. Standing right next to him was a figure. At first, it was just a dark shape, But as his eyes adjusted to the low light, he realized it looked exactly like his cousin. He found it strange, even a little irritating, and asked what his cousin wanted. But the figure didn't say anything. It didn't even move, but simply just stood there, staring down at him with a blank expression. Getting more frustrated, he raised his voice and asked again, louder this time, "What do you want?" He reached out to push him away, but when he did, his hands went right through the figure. At that exact moment, he heard his cousin shift and grunt in his bed on the other side of the room. He looked over and saw him lying there, still under the covers. When he turned back toward the spot where the figure had been standing, it was now gone. The next morning, he told his cousin what had happened. His cousin admitted he'd experienced strange things in the house too, though nothing like that. When he told his aunt and uncle, they didn't react much. They didn't accuse him of imagining it, but they didn't seem surprised either. They quickly changed the subject and didn't bring it up again. About a year later, the aunt and uncle moved to a different town and the house was eventually torn down. Over the years, the cousin has continued to share stories of other paranormal things he's experienced. Even now though, the memory still bothers him. He's never been able to explain what he saw that night, and it continues to leave questions that haven't been answered. Seeing cousin's doppelganger. Years ago, when the author was around 18, her family held a surprise 50th anniversary party for her grandparents at their home in Virginia. It was a big event with friends and relatives expected to arrive soon. Most of the family was outside setting up under a large tent in the yard, with her parents, sisters, aunt, and 2 young cousins. Only one cousin, Jonathan, wasn't out there. Not known to her at the time, he was inside the house playing video games in a back bedroom. While the others prepared the decorations outside, she stayed indoors working on a display table for the cake. Her grandparents' house had a ramp leading from the back door down to the yard. As she walked down that ramp, she saw Jonathan coming up. He was about 9 years old at the time, and she casually joked, "What are you doing, brat?" expecting some kind of smart remark in return, which would have been typical for him. But instead of responding, he just stared at her and gave this strange, creepy smile before turning and running back toward the tent. She didn't think too much of it at that moment and headed back inside because she had forgotten the gold glitter table scatter she needed. But right as she came in through the door, she saw Jonathan walking down the hallway, now with his Game Boy Advance in hand, heading to the kitchen for a drink. That's when everything stopped making sense. She asked him how he had gotten inside so fast since she'd just seen him outside running toward the tent. He looked at her like she was the one acting weird and said he hadn't left the house since arriving. He'd been playing his game the whole time, but she was sure of what she saw. It wasn't a blur or just a glimpse, but it was him. Same clothes, same face, same everything. There were no other boys at the party, only girls aside from him. She also remembered exactly where she'd been standing when she saw him on the ramp. Looking back, she recalled how strange the interaction was. Jonathan didn't speak, just smiled in a way that felt wrong. Off. She described it as evil, not in a dramatic way, but in a sense that something about it didn't sit right. It wasn't how her cousin normally acted, especially not toward her. Later, she remembered something her great-grandmother had once experienced in that same house. The home had originally been a kind of countryside escape from the city used by her great-grandparents, but her great-grandmother had always disliked being there. She rarely visited and avoided staying overnight. On one of the rare occasions when she did agree to go, she was brushing her hair in front of her bedroom mirror when she saw what looked like her own daughter, who was the author's grandmother, wearing a yellow nightgown. The reflection didn't just appear in the mirror, but she turned around and saw it directly in the room, just for a moment. Later, when she called her daughter in a panic, she learned that her daughter had been in Maryland at the time and had never owned a yellow nightgown in the first place. To this day, her grandparents still live in the house. It's located on land with deep Civil War history and has always had a reputation for unexplained activity. Whether it's the house, the land, or something tied to certain people in the family, she still doesn't know. But what happened that day, seeing someone she knew acting strangely where they shouldn't have been, never left her. She's still not sure if it was a doppelganger, a ghost, or something else entirely, but she does know it wasn't just her imagination. D is for doppelganger. In late 2012, a woman had been dating her boyfriend for nearly a year when something unusual started happening. He began seeing someone who looked exactly like her, not once but repeatedly. These sightings happened about once or twice a month, always at his house, and always when she wasn't around. At first, it was just quick glimpses. He'd spot her figure out of the corner of his eye, walking down the hallway or standing near his room. But over time, the details became more specific. He started noticing her scent, the perfume she always wore right before seeing the figure. None of his family members used that perfume, and she didn't leave any clothes or personal items at his place, so there was no reason that scent should have been there. The lookalike didn't also just resemble her, but it wore the same kind of outfits she usually wore and carried itself in the same way. But despite the familiar appearance, something felt off. Each time he saw it, he described the atmosphere as heavy and sad. It wasn't threatening, but it didn't feel right either. Then one night in June, things escalated. The two of them were on the phone having a normal conversation when mid-sentence he suddenly went silent. She asked what was wrong, but all she got was a whisper. After a pause, he told her he could see her, or at least someone who looked exactly like her. He had been walking around the dining table during their call when he noticed someone sitting on the couch in the lounge. His family had already gone to bed, so he thought it was strange. When he looked closer, it was her double, just sitting there like it belonged. He panicked and ran into the adjacent playroom. From there, he couldn't see it anymore, but still heard it moving, walking into the kitchen, opening the fridge or cabinets, and getting what sounded like a glass of water. Later, he checked, but there was no glass at a place. She tried to calm him down over the phone and asked what kind of feeling he got from it. He said the presence felt deeply sad, not violent, not angry, just worn down and in pain. He also noticed something strange, that the figure had brown hair. She had dyed her naturally brown hair blonde, which made the details stand out. It felt personal, like the thing wasn't copying her as she was now, but as she had been before. After that night, the sighting stopped. He hadn't seen it again, and she didn't doubt him, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. The fear in his voice that night was raw, and it wasn't something anyone could fake. What confused her the most, though, was why it was imitating her, why it only showed up to him, and what it actually wanted. No one else in the house had ever seen it, and whatever it was, it seemed connected to her, or at least to the version of her that he carried in his mind. My mother's doppelganger. This happened around 10 p.m. back in 2001 when the author was a teenager. It's not a long or dramatic story, but it stuck with him and left him wondering if what he saw was real and if it was what exactly he witnessed. At the time, he lived in a house where the kitchen, the family room, and his mother's bedroom were all connected by a short stretch of hallway. From the couch in the living room, you couldn't directly see into the kitchen, but you could tell when someone left it, either from the light spilling out or from the sound of someone walking toward the living room. To get to 4 of the 5 bedrooms, including his mother's, you had to pass through the living room. That night, his dad and sister were already asleep. His mother was still up in the kitchen cleaning, and he had just come out of the bathroom and noticed that her bedroom door was slightly open, with a dim light glowing from inside. He could still hear her moving around in the kitchen, so he figured she must have left the bedroom light on earlier and just hadn't closed the door all the way. He then sat down on the couch in the living room and started watching TV. About 10 minutes later, he saw his mother walk out of the kitchen and past the living room, or at least he thought he saw her. She was wearing a deep red nightgown he didn't recognize. She didn't say a word either, didn't make a sound, didn't even glance at him. She just walked calmly to her room, opened the door, and went in, leaving it slightly ajar. It didn't seem weird at the time, and he assumed she was just tired and going to bed. But then, 5 minutes later, the kitchen light turned off, and his mother came out again. This time, she was wearing her usual white nightgown. As she walked by, she casually said she was going to bed and then went into her room and closed the door behind her. He sat there frozen, unsure what he had just seen. There was no reaction from her, no scream, no confusion, no sound at all. She had walked into her bedroom like nothing was wrong, like no one had gone in before her. He stayed in the living room for another hour after that, half expecting something to happen, but the house remained quiet. He never told his mother about it, and he wasn't sure she'd believe him anyways. But he has told his wife and her family, and it's something he still thinks about. The moment was short, but the feeling it left behind lasted for years. Voice Doppelganger. The author's earliest memory of something they couldn't explain goes back all the way to when they were 6 years old. At the time, their neighborhood in the Philippines had plenty of kids the same age, and they would often play outside together. Like many adults do, parents and older relatives warned the children not to stay out late, especially not past midnight, telling them that ghosts roamed the streets after dark. Being young, they believed it. One night, the author and a friend, a girl named Rika, dared each other to go outside at midnight to see if those ghost stories were true. They devised a plan that the author would leave their gate unlocked and Rika would sneak in, call to them through the bedroom window, and they'd go out together. But when the time came, the author didn't follow through. It wasn't that they were trying to bail on the plan, they just knew deep down it was all pretend. They weren't really expecting Rika to show up. So instead of staying up, they fell asleep next to their parents, forgetting all about it. Sometime during the night, they suddenly woke up. It was quiet and nothing seemed out of place. Still, they sat up in bed, now fully awake, with the window right behind them. They figured Rika had probably backed out too, just like they did. Then they heard a voice. It was Rika's voice calling from the window behind them. "Anne, come out now. Anne, let's go." The voice was clear, exactly how Rika sounded, but the author knew something was wrong. The tone, the timing, the feeling in the air. It didn't feel right. Every instinct said it wasn't really her. Freaked out, they quickly laid back down, pulled the blanket over their head, shut their eyes tight, and covered their ears. Eventually, they drifted back to sleep, and the next morning, the first thing they did was ask Rika if she had come to the house the night before. Rika said no, though she had never left home. Now, even as an adult, the author remembers every detail of that moment. My sister saw my doppelganger. About 10 years ago, when the author was around 13 or 14 years old, something happened that neither she nor her sister has been able to quite explain. It was a normal weekday afternoon, and the school bus dropped her off like usual around 3 p.m., stopping right in front of her house. As she stepped down from the bus and into the driveway, she noticed her older sister in the garage taking out the trash. But instead of greeting her, her sister just froze. She dropped the garbage bag, went pale, and stared at her with an expression that was hard to describe, a mix of fear and shock. The author, standing at the bottom of the driveway, was confused. She had no idea why her sister was looking at her like that. Concerned, she slowly walked toward the garage, thinking something might be wrong, maybe bad news about a family member or some kind of emergency. When she reached her sister and asked what was going on, there was no answer at first. Her sister just kept glancing at her, still looking pale and rattled. After a minute or two, they went inside. Once seated, her sister finally spoke, stumbling over her words. She asked, "Wait, you were at school?" Still confused, the author replied, "Yeah, why?" Her sister took a deep breath and started explaining. She said that about 15 minutes earlier, while sitting on her bed doing homework, the author had come into the room. Her radio had been playing on the floor near the door, and according to her sister, the author opened the door and calmly said the music was a bit too loud. Her sister agreed and said it was fine to turn it down. The author, or someone who looked and sounded exactly like her, then lowered the volume, closed the door, and walked away. At first, her sister hadn't thought anything of it, but then the real author came home. There was no room for confusion. The siblings didn't look alike and each had different fathers, and their appearance reflected that. The author was the only white girl in the family, while her sisters were mixed with different racial backgrounds. There was no one else in the house who could have been mistaken for her. And when they both went upstairs afterward, they found the radio exactly how her sister described, still playing, but much more quietly than usual. To this day, neither of them has figured out what happened. My sister's lookalike. This happened a few years ago when the narrator was around 9 or 10. At the time, they had developed a habit of waking up in the middle of the night, usually around midnight or shortly after. On one of these nights, they woke up feeling thirsty and decided to head downstairs for a glass of water before trying to fall back asleep. Their parents had already gone to bed and the house was quiet. The author's bedroom was located at the top of the stairs on the left-hand side, directly across from the younger sister's room. Between the two doors, along the wall facing the stairs, was a small bathroom. As the authors stepped out into the hallway, they noticed someone standing just outside their sister's bedroom. It looked exactly like their sister, same height, same build, same hair. She was standing still, facing slightly away, and didn't appear to notice them. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The author casually asked if she wanted to come downstairs for a drink too, but there was no answer. Instead, the figure slowly faded away. No movement, no sound, she simply vanished. Still half asleep, the author didn't immediately process what had happened. It wasn't until a few seconds later, as they glanced into the open bedroom behind where the figure had been standing, that it hit them. Their actual sister was still fast asleep in bed the entire time. The realization brought a sudden wave of fear. Without waiting around to figure out what they just seen, the narrator rushed back to their room and hid under the covers. The glass of water was forgotten. Looking back, the memory still stands out as the strangest experience they've ever had. Nothing similar has happened since, and they've never seen the figure again. What's more, their sister, the one being mimicked, never saw anything that night, despite the figure standing right outside her bedroom door. Even though the figure didn't seem threatening, there was something eerie about how unaware it seemed. It didn't look at the author, didn't move, didn't react at all. It was just there. Doppelganger of my brother. This experience happened when the author was 8 years old, while living in the same childhood home mentioned in their other stories. At the time, they shared a bedroom with their younger brother, who was about 5 or 6. The two of them slept in a bunk bed with the author on the bottom and their brother on the top. Around this age, the author began dealing with sleep issues, and what happened next only added to the restlessness. The events took place across 2 different nights. On the first night, they were lying in bed trying to fall asleep. Their dog was curled up beside them, and everything in the room was still. While turning over and readjusting the pillow, they happened to glance toward the foot of the bed and froze. Their brother was lying there, propped up on one elbow, staring at them with a blank expression. It wasn't just a vague shape or a trick of the light. It was clearly him. The author was confused but calm, assuming maybe he'd had a nightmare and climbed down from the top bunk to be closer. They were about to ask what was wrong, but before they could even say his name, the figure vanished. There was no noise, no movement, no reaction, just silence and disappearance. Still unsure of what had just happened, they eventually drifted back to sleep. A few nights later, something similar occurred, this time while fully awake. The author had been lying in bed again, struggling to sleep, but couldn't ignore the growing need to use the bathroom. The room and the bathroom were right across from each other, with just a narrow hallway in between. Both doors were always kept open, so it was easy to see into the bathroom from the bedroom doorway. As they walked to the threshold of the room, they could see someone standing at the bathroom sink. It was their brother again, this time brushing his teeth. The bathroom light wasn't on, but even in the dark, they could clearly make out his shape. Everything about him looked normal. Confused, the author asked, "Jake, what are you doing?" At the sound of their voice, the figure turned to look and then began to disappear in the same way as before. Slowly, without a sound, it faded out of view. Now disturbed and unsure what to think, the narrator turned around and went back to bed. And there, in the top bunk, was their brother, sound asleep exactly where he had been all along. At the time, they didn't know what a doppelganger was. It wasn't until later in life that they heard stories of people encountering doubles of others, unexplained copies that mimic someone's appearance, often silently and without emotion. They've also heard theories about astral projection, but that explanation didn't seem likely. Their brother had never believed in anything spiritual or paranormal, and certainly wouldn't have been trying to leave his body in his sleep. To this day, they're not sure what they saw, only that it happened twice, and both times it looked exactly like their brother.